More than ever, a new Islamic progressivism is trying to reconcile the faith of Islam with gay rights.
I felt very comfortable and very aware of the fact that Allah made me with all of my flaws and perfections, but made me to be a queer Muslim because Allah makes no mistakes.
From museum exhibits glorifying queer expressions in the Muslim world to Western Muslim politicians celebrating pride, progressive Muslims are on a mission to prove to their Western peers, and perhaps to themselves, that Islam is accepting of homosexuality. So in Islam, is it really okay to be gay? We'll skip straight to the obvious answer, no. Islam, as per scripture, is inherently hostile to gay rights. Mainstream Muslim leaders and theologians make no secret of this.
In Islam, any sexual relationship outside of nikah between a man and a woman is haram. Same-sex actions are unequivocally haram. So the one who denies its prohibition denies what is ma'loom min ad-din bil-darura, which takes one outside of the fold of Islam.
Islam forbids homosexuality as a practice, not as a feeling, because no one is. You can say someone is not in control of how they feel in some cases, and we accept that. So if someone feels in a certain way, then it's forbidden to act upon it. Like Ibn al-Qayyim, one of the scholars of Islam, he says up there with murder.
Opinion polls in Muslim countries indicate an overwhelming majority in strong opposition. Likewise, there are more than enough verses in the Quran and authoritative hadith to establish Islam's violently anti-gay stance. But a more interesting question than whether Islam condones homosexuality, it doesn't, is why so many people in the West seem to believe it does. Adherents to the school of Islamic tolerance make appeals to history. And indeed, just as one can find countless historical examples of Christians behaving contrary to their own religion's teachings, the same is true of Islamic societies. Literary and political elites in Islamic states throughout history have engaged in, written about, or artistically portrayed homosexual acts. This stretches all the way back to the homoerotic poetry of Abu Nawas, who lived a century and a half after Muhammad. This was the so-called Islamic Golden Age, when the Muslim world made great strides in science, mathematics, and culture, buoyed by cosmopolitan and relatively tolerant cultural mores. The poetry of Nawas, though he is one of the most renowned poets of the era, belonged to a genre with countless other writers, poetry addressing a male beloved. Similarly, the Gulistan, one of the most important works of Persian literature, written in the 13th century, contains abundant depictions of homosexual love and desire. In the Ottoman Empire, poetry exploring homosexual love was openly written and circulated until the 19th century. There's an obvious disconnect here. Islam says homosexuality is unacceptable, yet some Muslims historically have appeared to tolerate it. A common argument is that Islamic societies did not possess a concept of homosexuality the way Western Christians did. Instead, they distinguished between active and passive roles in sexual encounters. Much like the Romans, Muslims considered the former masculine and permissible, the latter feminine and dishonorable for an adult man. It is suggested that it was only the advent of British colonialism that changed this conceptual framework, and active sodomy laws were codified by colonial authorities, supposedly explaining contemporary Islamic hostility to homosexuality. However, there are some major problems with this argument. First, the active-passive distinction is not an egalitarian understanding of sexual relationships. The passive role was inherently humiliating, reserved for those who were not free. It was also frequently pederastic. This was the case in the courts of the Ottoman Empire, where slave boys were used as sexual partners. This is a long way from our modern concept of mutually consensual same-sex relationships between adults. Second, the extreme exclusion of women from art and public life in most Islamic societies has naturally led to more male-male interaction. This may have contributed an undercurrent of homoeroticism throughout Islamic history. But it's also worth noting that some acts which carry homosexual overtones in the West, like two men holding hands, have not necessarily been seen that way in the Muslim world. Finally, even if we grant that some Islamic societies throughout history did not understand sexuality through the same or opposite sex lens, many clearly did, including and especially Muhammad and the early Muslims. The Quran and Hadith criminalize sodomy, those who do as the people of Lot did. The earliest Islamic sources are not divided on this topic, and since the founding of the major schools of Islamic jurisprudence, all have agreed that homosexuality is a serious crime that merits harsh punishment, ranging from lashes to execution. One story goes that Abu Bakr, the first Rashidun Caliph, had a man burned alive for sodomy, though the evidence for this is disputed. In this light, the colonialism argument looks especially weak. Muslims living in post-colonial states today need not look to legacy British statutes for condemnation of homosexuality when it's written into their faith itself. Today, it's actually the Islamic movements most hostile to Western values that reject homosexuality most ferociously. Salafism and Wahhabism, meant to usher in a return to original Islamic values, are one example of this. The fact also remains that the British and other European powers began to tolerate homosexuality not long after the end of the colonial era, while most Muslim majority countries have dug in. Those who blame colonialism for modern Islamic hostility to homosexuality are uninformed at best, or being deliberately disingenuous at worst. In the same vein, there are plenty of historical examples of Islamic peoples taking the Quran and Hadith seriously about homosexuality. The 18th century Fatwa Alamgiri of the Mughal Empire mandated harsh punishments for homosexuality. Slaves found to have committed sodomy were punished with 50 lashes, free non-Muslims 100 lashes, and guilty Muslims were simply executed. In the 19th century, when the practice of taking slave boys as sexual partners began to fall out of favor among Ottoman elites, Ahmad Sadat Pasha, a scholar and statesman who oversaw the codification of Islamic law in the empire, rejoiced. He wrote that it seemed as though the people of Lot were disappearing from the earth, restoring the balance of nature. The policies of Islamic states today adhere far better to the letter of Islamic law than the poetry of Abu Nawas. Iran hangs gay men from cranes. Same-sex relations are illegal in most Muslim-majority countries. Militant jihadists execute suspected homosexuals. These acts are understood accurately as faithfulness to the Islamic tradition. The same goes for the attitudes of Western Muslims, who remain on average much more anti-gay than the general population. Polls in the United States and Britain confirm this. Sometimes this goes further than difference of opinion, like in the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting. The minority of progressive Muslims who do seek to reconcile their faith with tolerance for homosexuality rely on arguments of mistranslation or misunderstanding. The story of Lot, they argue, is really about inhospitality and sexual assault, and sodomy or homosexuality as such would have been fine on their own. This requires a very distorted reading of the text as it is written, with tortured explanations as to why early Muslims were not confused at all about the story's meaning. Their mental gymnastics to try to reconcile irreconcilable belief systems. Islam is not unique among Abrahamic faiths in its condemnation of homosexuality, nor in the punishment homosexuality is supposed to receive, death. It is unique that currently its most conservative manifestations on this topic are in the overwhelming majority. Christians are divided on the topic, while Jews are more accepting. Perhaps Islam never having undergone the same kind of secularization as the other two religions has something to do with it. Regardless, as Islam retreats to its founding principles, it finds a remarkably simple stance on the topic, that homosexuals should be killed. This is obviously deeply concerning for those who, like us, care about gay rights. Progressive and queer Muslims might do well to ask themselves the question, is this really a belief system you want to be a part of?